Welcome to the Valley College Connection, where John Kawai and Scott Wigan, two Valley professors, engage in a conversation about success with educators and students. Each week, they'll sit down with a different guest to find out ways each of us have had to plan, persevere, and overcome to where we are now. The show will also highlight resources and services that are working to make a difference at Valley College.
We are joined today by Professor Greg Morrison, Program Director of Respiratory Therapy at Los Angeles Valley College. Thank you so much for joining us today, Greg.
My pleasure.
We'd love to hear your story about how you got to Valley College, and we'd really enjoy to hear all the steps along the way. So take it as far back as you'd like to go.
Well, I'm a born and raised San Fernando Valley kid, and my parents ran a moving and storage company in the San Fernando Valley through my whole childhood and into adulthood as well. So I grew up on a moving truck driving around the valley. I was right next to what's now called Lake Balboa. It was all Van Nuys at one time, and it's Lake Balboa now. So yeah, I was a student at Mulholland High in Birmingham. I actually didn't have a big plan on what I wanted to do in life. I kind of wanted to, I've actually always loved to teach. When I was 18, I used to drive out to Simi Valley with my aunt, who was an elementary school teacher, and just help her. I really liked doing that. So I learned that I like to teach. And I was actually a biology major at Pierce College. I was going to be working with the next Marlon Perkins, if anyone remembers Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. But,
that's great.
Yeah.
So why don't you explain that? Because that's a great pool from a long time ago.
Yeah, it is. So Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom was on like right after The Wonderful World of Disney. And it was one of the few shows where people went out. Now there's a ton of these documentary shows, but he would go to the different areas, and he would put his crew in a tense danger, and they would look at animals, and he would do a commercial. He would turn everything into a commercial for Mutual of Omaha. Baby lions have to rely on their mother for protection, but if you need protection, you need Mutual of Omaha's insurance. So that was what I wanted to do. So I was taking biology classes. I thought I was going to be taking biology classes at Pierce. I did get a GE Associates there. But it turns out I was taking mostly chemistry classes. I only took like a couple biology classes, but there was all this chemistry that was required. And I realized after my third class in qualitative analysis was my last chem class, that was about as far as I was going to be able to go. It wasn't coming to me easily. I barely passed the class. And then a buddy of mine, I knew I didn't want to stay working for my moving company anymore. And I didn't want to work for a business. I wanted something.
Let me roll you back
Sure.
a little bit on that. So were you driving the truck? Were you loading the truck?
When I was a kid, I used to ride on top of the seat. My mom and I, when I was in high school, would actually, and my dad was the biggest guy around, Big Phil. My dad was like 6'2", massive guy, always the biggest guy in the room. And my mom was like 5'2". So it was a big comparison. But she and I actually used to take the station wagon, and we could load a whole living room into the station wagon, and we would deliver it. And this, 12-year-old kid with his mom would come in and deliver furniture. So I did that. And then when I got old enough, I drove the trucks. And then that's when I realized I didn't want to work for a company. I didn't want to be all of a sudden working for some place and then they closed and I didn't have a job. So I realized I wanted something I could move around with. I wanted a backup that I could put in my pocket. And a friend of mine who also worked for the moving company was looking into going to nursing school. I knew I didn't want to be a nurse, but right down the hall, there was a respiratory therapy program. I didn't know anything about respiratory therapy, but I had taken all the prerequisites. So I went, well, I can just start today. Basically it was before the semester and they signed up. And so I'm at Valley College now as a student, back in polyester is what I call it. So I entered into the respiratory program here at Valley.
Before we go too far to that, because I think
Sure.
we're going to get down there 20 minutes from now, but I wanted to get a sense of who you were. So when you were in school, were you a good student when you were in
I
elementary
was
school
average.
or junior high?
I was just an average student. I had friends who were really excellent students, and that was never me. And there were my friends that my best friend I had since first grade, used to live down the street from me. We're still best friends. And then my other friends I met when I was in respiratory school. So I was an average student with no big ambition, kind of intimidated by the students who said, I know what I'm going to do. So I had my friends they knew exactly what their path was going to be, I think, since 10th grade, which, as we learned, isn't the way most people get their career started. So like I said, I kind of stumbled into respiratory therapy. So yeah, that was the first time I was actually the top student in that class, and that was the first time ever, because the stuff just made sense to me, and then you were applying it. So like I said, I was kind of an average student until I got into respiratory therapy, and then that just made sense to me, even though I didn't know anything about it. So.
What was the application process for you to apply to respiratory therapy?
It was basically you just enrolled in the classes. If you had all the prereqs, they gave me the list of prereqs, and I just enrolled into the classes because I was qualified. I had a couple of science classes to take, and one of them was I still had to take anatomy and physiology, so I had a couple of prereqs to take before I went into the program. And my anatomy instructor actually had a huge influence on me. He was an adjunct instructor. And while I was in his class, my dad died suddenly. I just turned 21 and I lost my father. And he came over to me and said, we were talking, and he goes, well, what are you going to do? And he goes, well, I'm in the respiratory therapy program. And he goes, just make sure you don't stop there. Okay. You're capable of a lot more. And I remember one afternoon, I actually got into an auto accident driving to the college. And I don't know how he found out about it, but he came in and checked on me. I was late to my class. So he came in, all of a sudden he was kind of checking around to make sure I was okay. So I've never really forgotten Nick Pappas. He was a huge influence for me.
Greg, how did you end up at Valley College in terms of choosing?
Well, they had the respiratory therapy program.
So Pierce.
I was a graduate from Pierce. I went from Birmingham to Pierce, got my associates, and then found out about this respiratory program, which I didn't know anything about. And it was back then there were only a few community colleges that offered it, and then there was UCLA, and then there were some private schools, proprietary schools. So I rolled right in, and like I said, I just needed a semester or so of prerequisites before I could enter into the second phase of the program, which has all of the respiratory courses and the time in the hospital and that sort of thing.
So how has the application process changed? Is it much more difficult to get into respiratory therapy now?
Yeah. Since about 2006. Okay, so, and the internet has a lot to do with this. It used to be that there wasn't, as a matter of fact, the first year I taught, we graduated 4 people. So, but then all of a sudden people started talking healthcare. The nursing program was quite busy, and a lot of nursing students people would go in to apply to the nursing program and find out there was a wait list, but they would walk down the hall and come and see us, and we had the same prerequisites. So for a while we struggled with enrollment, but like immediately after that, so like 2006, 2007, the word got out, and typically we have a wait list to get into the second phase of the program. Usually there's about 5 or 6 people that have to wait a year to get into the program, into the second phase. The first phase is all the prerequisites, and then they enroll into the second phase. And the application process is based on their application date to the college. We were going to use GPA, and then we found out that community colleges can't do that. So we were given 2 choices, either a lottery system or reward longevity at the college. So that's how we do it. So that's why I tell students, when you're starting out, start taking something at Valley, even if you're in Ventura County, take a class online and get your application date set. And we're way impacted right now with this year as well. Probably our largest group coming in.
How large is the group? What is your cohort?
We can take about 28 students because it's based on the number of people we can put in the hospital for training. And respiratory therapy departments are not big departments like nursing. So I can only put, a couple of students in each medical center. So the medical center size, the number of clinic spots limits the size of the class.
Okay. So what was your experience like in the RT program?
Well, like I said, when I was a student in the RT program, first of all, I met two of my best friends. I still have them. We still get together in that program. And the experience was that the main thing I learned was that, first of all, you can do it. You can work in critical care. You can work with sick people. You can work around gooey, gory things because you're helping the patient. It's different than if you're standing there observing it. But you can get into these, hairy things. And, for respiratory therapy, we take care of all the sickest people, even though we get no media coverage for it, other than saying other healthcare workers. When you see the news screen and there's somebody standing next to the patient on the ventilator, that's a respiratory therapist. So we take care of the sickest people. And in the program, what I learned in the hospital setting was they're the best people to work with. Healthcare people are just the best people. And if you ask anyone who works in healthcare, you ask them what are the top 3 things that you like about your profession, number one's going to be the people you work with. I mean, you work with some very unfortunate folks, but basically, when I started working, I went to Northridge Hospital, was my first job, and that's also where I met Cheryl Pearson. She was a rookie too. We both got hired at the same time, and she had moved from Pennsylvania to California. So we both kind of started as kids at the same time at Northridge. We were like the rookies on there. But the people that we worked with, and like I said, are just the best people. They really are. So that was just such a pleasure. We had, when I first started working, we were all about the same age on that shift. So we had a good time. So, but yeah, it was great.
So Greg, how did that work in the transition from being in the Valley program to CSUN? Was the program, is it a 2-year program when you were a student and then to transfer to CSUN?
Yeah, it's always been, there were what they used to call them 1-year schools and 2-year schools. It's always been a 2-year program. It's actually 3 years to do it. So now they call it advanced level, and all the schools are. So, basically I went to Valley, worked at Northridge, and then one Memorial Day, in 1981, I went to visit one of my buddies who was no longer a respiratory therapist. He's a terrible respiratory therapist, actually, but he ended up being the most successful women's basketball coach, Ned Mercetic. So if you Google him and see his career, he's been at Ventura College. So they were staying with some couple of buddies in Ventura at a house that was literally 2 houses from the beach and overlooking the elementary school. And I came up there, I said, this place is fantastic. It's quiet, it's not dirty. So I said, hey, I was still living at home, and I was like, you guys want another roommate? We'll get a bigger place. So I moved to Ventura and lived in this big 2-story house that overlooked an elementary school and a beach. Went to work at St. John's Regional out in Oxnard. So I had to leave my Northridge crew behind. And then while I was living in Ventura County, that's where I met my wife. And in the 90s, I realized that I probably needed to get a degree because I was hoping I could teach at some point. So I enrolled at the satellite campus in Ventura for Cal State Northridge and got my degree in health education. I just took like 1 or 2 classes at a time and punched it through it. It was kind of serendipitous that right about the time I finished getting my degree, and I was working full-time at St. John's. And actually, I cut back from St. John's. I tried to leave respiratory therapy because my brother came up to Santa Barbara, and we reopened the moving company called Rainbow Movers. So I had that business experience of starting out with like 7 brothers, opening up I only had 1 brother, but the 7 guys, we opened up Rainbow Movers. I was still working part-time at the hospital. I was going to leave it. And we did the full business cycle where you start out and you're all working together with your owners, Everyone's working together. We ended up taking over. We were like the busiest mover in Santa Barbara. They were rainbow movers. Our trucks were all painted real bright. And then we expanded, and then we overexpanded, and then the market died, and that was about the end of that. And then I went back to it. The good thing was, here I was, it validated my decision. I was sitting there going, oh my God, we're gonna have to close the company. And I go, well, that's okay. If we close the company where I'm working like 6 days a week for nothing, I can go back to the hospital and I can work 3 days a week because we do 12-hour shifts. So that took all the fear away, because that was a pretty scary thing. You've got a company and you're going to have to close up. So that validated my decision originally to have something. I would have never got to Ventura County without my respiratory license because there was no work up here back then. It was the oil companies or the government, and that was about it. But I had work right away because there was a shortage of a respiratory therapist up here.
So, I'm sorry. So when you got your bachelor's, is there no bachelor's of respiratory therapy or?
Not back then.
Okay.
Not back
then. And then in order to teach, you still have to get a master's, right?
No, not in the CTE program.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in academics you do. And then we'll need people with a master's degree to teach in the new bachelor's program if and when we open that.
Okay.
So it was real funny. Right as I got the degree, I happened to go to, we have to take continuing education. So I went to a seminar at Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital, and I bumped into the guy who trained me, Dr. Frank Sinsheimer. And I said, hey, if you ever need somebody to teach, he goes, oh, we do right now. I said, I need you next month. So it was like within a semester of me getting my degree, all of a sudden I had an adjunct opportunity at Valley. And that was like about 97, 98, something like that. And then in 2004, the other professor who trained me, Ginny Ediger, she retired. So Frank hired me. And that's how I got to be the director at Valley back in 2004.
Wow.
I guess we should have started this in the very beginning. What exactly are the responsibilities of a respiratory therapist?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get asked that quite a bit. So basically, if you look at, if you compare us to nursing or to say X-ray technology, an X-ray radiologist, okay, and I can say that because my wife was one. If you look at an X-ray tech, they do only diagnostic testing. So they don't really do anything therapeutic for the patient. And they don't really get a chance to get much involved, with the patients and their care. And then if you look at nursing, it's mostly care, right? They have some diagnostics testing that they do. So respiratory therapy, we're kind of both. And we don't have to do any bedpans, so that's a huge advantage for respiratory therapy. You can always separate nurses and respiratory therapy. The nurses hate mucus, and I tell everybody that mucus is our life for respiratory. And then I can't, I don't want to be anywhere near a bedpan. So, so we do therapeutic and we do diagnostics. So we have blood tests that we do and pulmonary function testing that we do. But on the therapeutic side, we take care of the sickest people in the world, from newborn neonates, which is also my specialty, to the elderly. And you got to be really sick to need a respiratory therapist. You have to be really sick to be low in oxygen. Most of us have been really sick at one time, but not to the point where you needed oxygen. So we do the oxygen therapy, the life support machines, that's a big part of our job, all of the CPR. We deliver critical neonates, and we're critical in the NICU with the ventilators. We run right now, COVID is a huge challenge for the RTs because when COVID first broke out, normally what we would do when people would go into this kind of respiratory failure, we would put them to sleep and put them on the vent. Well, it turns out when we put people on the ventilator with COVID, they didn't do very well. So now we have to keep them off the vent, and that's the RT. He runs in the room and changes the patient between oxygen therapy and non-invasive back and forth. And then when it's finally time, then they'll call the doctor and say, okay, we have to put the breathing tube in. We do what's called intubation in the neonatal units, a little bit in the adult side, but we're in charge of the patient's airway. So,
so you do put the tubes down the nose?
In some hospitals, yes, we can. That is part of our practice. But in the neonatal intensive care unit, the RTs typically intubate there because often they're in a situation in the delivery room without a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So, but on the adult side, usually it's the physician who intubates. And then, but once it's in, we're in charge of the tube. I always tell the students, your two most important job is don't pop the lung and don't lose that airway.
Well, I was thinking that, like, how terrifying is that the first time you have to do that?
The first time I did it, we did it on kittens. They had us train on kittens.
Oh, you didn't do it? I thought you didn't do it on another student.
No, we didn't do it on another student. No, so it's typically there. You know, when you're first learning how to do that, it's not going to be in a huge emergency where the patient's crashing. Mm-hmm. So that's another reason why it's very difficult to do that training. Because you need enough patients to get everyone trained up on. So normally the physicians are all trained to do that, especially now that we live in a world with intensivists. But we're right there by the beds. We're the person standing next to the doctor holding the tube. Mm-hmm. And we're the one that has to keep that in place. So we have a lot of responsibility. It's physically a runaround job, and a standing job. You're standing in the NICU or running around. You do see quite a few patients in a day. And we have patients.
What I do notice about RT is that they're always walking.
Yeah.
Like the number of miles that you just must put on your feet
mm-hmm.
to cover the number of patients that you have to see.
Yeah, that's why I'm not an RT anymore. I actually stayed working at St. John's Regional till 2015. So I was still pulling down 1 day a week, even when I was teaching full time. So then in 2015, I decided to cut back to one full-time job. And so I met Cheryl Pearson there, and then she actually came to work because she moved to Ventura County in the 90s, and she came to work at St. John's in Oxnard. And then when I left, she became the director there. And then when I got to the college, when Professor Santana that we had hired, he actually took a position at Santa Monica College, and then Cheryl applied here. So Cheryl, my program is a huge family. Professor Pearson and I go back to when we were at Northridge, and Professor Kelly, I worked with him as a respiratory. I hired him as a respiratory therapist in the 90s. Our medical director, Dr. Rothfeld, has been there before I was there. One of our other instructors is a former graduate. So that's the thing that's really special about Valley. It isn't me, it's the clinic sites that we have, like UCLA and Children's Hospital and Cedars, and then we have Northridge, and we have the St. John's hospitals. But also everybody, and you can probably appreciate this in your department, everybody works together always. But there's no me. There's what's best for the students and how do we do it, and we trust each other completely, even though we might disagree. And that's a pretty cool working environment. So our program really is like a family because we've all been together. I mean, we handpicked these guys. So it's a very, very tight group that we work with.
So what is your program like? You have, I guess, both the academic side and the clinical side? How's
correct. Yeah. So there's 2 phases to the program. And similar to nursing, from start to finish, it takes about 3 years. You've got 1.5 years to take all of your science and general ed prerequisites. And then when you're in your last semester, which is in the fall, and you're in our first respiratory class, it's an equipment class, that's when you apply to the program. And then the program in phase 2 starts in the spring, and it goes spring, summer, fall, winter, and spring again. You're taking lab classes on Monday and Tuesday, lecture and lab on Monday and Tuesday, and then you go to the hospital for 12-hour shifts on Wednesday and Thursday, or some hospitals are Thursday, Friday.
So what's the hospital experience like?
So the hospital experience is, well, if the students show up in the morning, which is at 6 or 6:30, depending upon the facility, they get assigned to a respiratory therapist. And they spend most of their time with a respiratory therapist. The Valley College instructors, we only go to each hospital for about 3 hours a week. unlike nursing, where the nursing instructor is there with all of the nursing students all day long. So respiratory programs, that would be unsustainable when you're talking about two students in a hospital. So we do what's called a mastery system. And we have designated hospital respiratory therapists that work for the hospital that act as preceptors for the students. So, and then the students will go to 5 different facilities. So they really get a taste of the real world. You know, and some of that world's not fair. Even in the hospital, there's lots of unfair things that happen. You never know who your RT is going to be. You might have a great teacher, or I can remember when I was a student and I was assigned to this therapist, and in the first half hour, I must have asked him like 15 questions. And he goes, "Look, Greg," the other Greg that was a therapist there, Greg was the educator. He goes, "Greg's your instructor. I'm just trying to pay the rent, man, and I want to get a cup of coffee." I went, "Oh, okay." So you learn how to go with, you learn the real world when you go there. So just about every student has, something that happens, but it's all a really good learning experience. So, and it's 12 hours long. So it's you get report in the morning. The day shift starts really fast, and then you have to handle all the emergencies that come in.
Wow, it sounds like it sounds like a really rigorous, demanding program. I'm sure very, very rewarding though for the students.
Yes, it is, and it's really come a long way. Originally, we were respiratory therapy technicians. Don't ever call the RTs a technician, and so we worked to kind of upgrade our stuff. But when I started, I can still remember a physician going, "Why should I listen to this kid who's only been to school for a few weeks? But I've been doing this for years." Okay, well, trust me, they listen to me now. So,
right. What's the sort of job market look like for respiratory therapists?
I just left Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He's posting 20 positions.
20 positions?
Yeah.
Wow.
Cedars is big. So the job market's very good, but the hospitals can still be selective. So it went from they would hire anybody, especially coming out of the 90s into the early 2000s. The hospitals were so busy and the nursing shortage was really bad, and there was a shortage of respiratory therapists. So pretty much if you had a license, they were going to hire you and see if it worked out. Okay. Well, now the interview process is a lot more rigorous, and they're really in a situation where they can be selective. And the most important skill that you need to get the job and do the job, it isn't so much technical, it's your ability to communicate. Your communication skills. And I have a program that's 60% ESL every year. So that's usually one of the big challenges, is to get my English second language folks, and some of the English are very, very quiet people. So we have to learn how to speak up. And I tell you, you need to learn to sound like me. Healthcare people, we all kind of sound the same when we talk and present and work with patients. So you need to learn how to learn the language and use it. The other thing is I don't know what it is now, but when they did these big studies on why people died in the hospital, the 5th leading cause of death over 100,000 people was medical errors, mistakes. Not we tried it and it didn't work and you died. No, we did this to you and you died. And the single leading cause of medical mistakes are communication errors. So that's what I spend a lot of time. That's actually what I spend most of my time when I go see the students in the hospital. I don't walk around and see how well they can do a breathing treatment or how fast they can work. I sit them down and we go through their patients, and they have to be able to communicate effectively on their patients. So, but that's what gets people hurt. So communication skills are important.
And is it communication, all around in terms of the ability to communicate with the doctors, the nurses, the patients?
Yeah, you have to be a teacher. You have to be able to communicate to a 5-year-old, and you have to be able to stand there in the ICU and talk to the most important doctor in the world with the worst temper.
Right.
So you have to teach, especially if you're working in pediatrics. When my students go to Children's Hospital, they love the therapists there. They go, they're all great teachers. Yeah, you have to be when you're there, because you're working with the family and you're working with the patient. So,
yeah, my son has asthma. I have asthma. So we both spent a lot of time with RTs. We both have like all the equipment for breathing treatments at home because I mean, it makes a big deal because, like you said, it's when we're most desperate. Like when you can't breathe, you feel desperate.
Yeah.
And having someone there help you to breathe, that's a big deal. Knowing how to use your inhalers correctly. Mm-hmm. All of that is like, and also when, my relatives are going to pass away, the person that's around the most usually is the nurse and the RT.
Yep.
Right. So how do you, I know talking to the nurses, I think we were talking about what was sort of the shortest distance between entering Valley College and the middle class. And I think both nursing and respiratory therapy is the shortest distance.
We're the deal. That's what I go to the high schools. I just went to a high school in Panorama City. I tell those kids, 3 years with me and you're out of the house. You're making enough money. You can move out. You can go work in any state in the country. You can actually work outside the country for community college rates.
Right. My son's close friend, his mother went to UC Irvine, paid all that money, and then couldn't get a job, and then became an RT. She's been working ever since for decades, right? So, it's not always, people are always thinking like, oh, it's the school and the degree, and not necessarily. RT's been open for a long time.
The community college, these programs, especially the community college programs, we're the best deal. I mean, even if you're going to go to a 4-year school, why would, when that's when everyone changes their mind, it makes more sense. And you're almost guaranteed entrance into the university then. So, but if you talk to the RTs, we're a real, we're an interesting group. I still remember that in the days of yore, well, once you had to actually go, there wasn't a license. You just graduated and you could start working, and then you had to take your credentialing exam. And they only offered them like once or twice a year, and you went to a place like USC. And I remember standing in line with 50, 60 people. And I looked around and go, man, we're a weird group of folks. We were like all over the place. There were the study addicts there, and then there was some guy who was smoking in the back, and we're kind of all over the place. We're kind of a wild bunch that a lot of individuals.
So
and just about every one of them has some kind of odd story about how they became a respiratory therapist, and none of them are, I always wanted to do it. With the exception of I've had some students who were asthmatics or cystic fibrosis, and they saw a respiratory therapist when they were kids, so they knew about it. But other than that, it's usually they're looking and they find out that healthcare is a good job and it looks like a good job, so they enter it and don't know it. So, but most of us have kind of ways that we stumbled into it. One of my best friends actually did stumble into it. He was a ex-Vietnam vet, and he went to the fire department and got injured, so he got on state disability that paid for retraining, and he showed up over at the Simi Valley Adult School into the respiratory therapy program there. And the instructor came over at the end of the day and said, I don't have you on my list. Well, my friend was actually drunk, and he walked into the RT class and sat there. And he was supposed to be in a orthodontia class. He was supposed to be learning how to make dentures, but he stumbled into the respiratory therapy class, not hungover, but actually drunk. And then by the end of the class, he'd sobered up, and she goes, well, do you want to stay? And he did. That's how he became an RT. So I'm always a big supporter of the average student who doesn't really think they know what they want to do, and they're intimidated by all their friends who know where they're going to go. I had my USC, buddies that went to USC, and they knew what they were going to do. So most of us kind of get an opportunity and move into it and see what we can do with it. So that's far more common. And I can still remember when I finally chose respiratory therapy, years later, we went to a high school reunion with my two buddies. We were always really impressed that you went into that. Whereas, we kind of made a decision early. I don't know if I still want to be an accountant and that kind of thing. So nobody has their act together, I think, is the message.
Mhm.
But
Does
get,
having a
get
bachelor's
something that you
matter?
can put in your pocket. Get something with a
Yeah.
career that you can put in your pocket so you could always work. Like I said, I was able, when the moving company failed, I went right back to work. I didn't skip a beat. I actually made more money and worked less.
Mhm. Does having a bachelor's matter when you have a RT license?
To get the license is up to the state.
Mhm.
So currently the state requires an Associate of Science degree,
Mhm.
but there's been a big push since 2015 to make the minimum standard a bachelor's degree. Not everybody agrees on this, and I'm one of them. That a new graduate, there's no need for a bachelor's degree for, like, if you're going to work at a community hospital right out of school, the bachelor's degree is not going to really benefit you because most of the bachelor's degree information is doing research and education and management and some advanced critical care and that sort of thing. So that's the big running debate. But I think the way so in the state of California, you don't have to have it, but some hospitals now are requiring it. Cedars-Sinai is just putting up that requirement, and they're going to pay for their therapists to go to school. Tech USC, who's agreed to help us with our bachelor's program, they only want to hire a bachelor's program. So you're going to find the employment is going to justify it. The accreditation body, COARC, they don't, all new schools have to offer a bachelor's program. Any new schools that would open up. And if the timeline looks like the state might, and this was before this AB 927, it was at a meeting last year, they'll probably eventually requirement. These things always tend to move forward in all these different pathways like physician assistant, physical therapy, and nursing. The reality pushes it towards that. So it's probably going to be mandated around 2030 to 2035 in California. That's the current timeline. But what's happening is the bachelor's degree, you don't need it to take care of patients unless you're working in a real high-level cardiothoracic unit or pediatric center. But a lot of those jobs that require bachelor's degrees are management or education positions. And research as well. One of my graduates actually does several research projects over at Children's Hospital.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So I feel like this
actually
movement,
3
a lot
of them
it,
now are in research.
Oh, wow. I feel like a lot of this is driven by the whole U.S. News rankings, where I think Keck USC has pushed for hiring only BSNs because of marketing, where they can say we have only BSNs, which isn't necessarily
and that's
something
Cedar's
that you need.
approach as well. Yeah, Cedars is taking the same approach.
Yeah, and I think what that does is it makes you higher on the U.S. News rankings, and I think that's what they're seeking. So they can charge more and get more patients by saying, "Look how high we are on the rankings."
That's there's a name for the ranking, and I can't remember what it is right now. I think it's a mastery, but I'm not sure. But I know that's what USC was doing. So
Yeah.
The reality is most of the staff respiratory therapist jobs, that I don't see how the bachelor's program is a huge advantage to those guys. But it's coming, and our profession's upgrading. And then there are more positions coming up that would require it. So that's kind of the running debate, is that the accreditation body says we don't have enough evidence that says a new graduate needs a bachelor's degree. It's probably a good idea, but so that's why it's not mandated now. But it's creeping its way forward, and the job market will probably dictate that. So, but it'll take a while for folks to get in there. So that's kind of the timeline. So that's why when this bill came in, we were like the perfect program for this new bachelor's degree award system that the state's doing.
Well, why don't you describe that for us?
So the state of California passed a bill called AB 927. I got a phone call from our president the day before the semester started and said, do you want to try to get a bachelor's degree program? And we've been talking about this and discussing it since like 2017, 16 in our advisory board. And we said, yes, we do. And he goes, okay. Then he explained to us about this new bill, which says you have to put this application packet together. It's going to take some time to do that. So if you want to do this, you need to get started on it now, at the beginning of the fall semester. So we had to pull our team together to do this project that I had no idea. So what the bill states is that the state will, every 6 months, the state will review applications from community colleges to create a bachelor's program. And they have rules to it. As you can imagine, the UC and CS systems were not happy when this first came up. So when it first came up and they did a pilot program a couple years ago, and that's how those other RT programs got established. So, but the rule is that for the UC and CS systems, you can't offer a program, a bachelor's program that exists at a Cal State or UC campus. Mm-hmm. So that's why nursing can't take advantage of this. So that's rule one. And in the other rule, this proposal or this bill, the reason for it is equity and employment. That's what we're after. Okay, we want opportunities for people to get jobs. So the bachelor's degrees that will apply to this, they have to be able to show evidence that this will actually create jobs. This will actually fill positions that are needed. So that's why you've got to do a labor market index and do all that sort of thing. So those are, and it can't be a brand new program. It already has to exist. So when they first came up with this system, we thought, oh man, nursing's going to jump all over this. And then there's also a big need for cybersecurity. Well, those are all offered at UC and CS campuses, so they can't apply currently through this bill.
It really does seem like it was a perfect match then for the program.
Yeah, it's all about, especially with our location, like Pasadena City College, their faculty did not approve starting a bachelor's program at Pasadena City College, and the reason is it's more affluent students, and most of them are transferring to UCs and CSs for almost all their program. There's no respiratory program there, right? So so they passed on. I want to talk to Erica and see how she feels about that. But in our case, look where we are. Our over 60% of the campus are Latinos from the neighborhood. We have a lot, our students are broke, right? And many of them don't have the wherewithal to make it to a university for a lot of reasons. So yeah, we're all about this.
So they can do the entire bachelor's at Valley College then?
Yeah, the bachelor's program will be online.
That's great. I think the nursing department, what they've done is they've partnered with CSUN, and I think there's another school they also partnered. I can't remember.
Yeah, they can do transfer agreements, articulation agreements, and actually I was going to talk to CSUN about that as well, because it won't be a requirement for a bachelor's in respiratory therapy necessarily. Students could do what I did, which was go to Cal State Northridge and get an allied health degree, and that's still going to meet the criteria. And I chose health education, but they can choose that. So I still promote students to do that. Because that's another good resource and a good way in.
But that's good that you can get it at community college prices, which is 10 times less.
Basically the tuition is the standard tuition is $45 a unit, and then there's an additional which goes into the general fund, and then $85 a unit goes directly to the college. Mm-hmm. So it's $130 a unit. I just looked up Loma Linda, which is a private university that offers respiratory therapy, and they're close to $900 a unit.
Wow. So,
Cedars-Sinai is going to create a grant, and they're going to pay $7,000 for students for their therapists to get a bachelor's degree. That pays for our whole program. Mm-hmm. So,
when are you hoping for this to get approved?
So it goes. It's off to the district. So it has to go through the district and the board of trustees. So it's in Barry and Ryan's hands right now. And then if they approve it, then in January it goes to the state, and then we'll probably find out. I think they said you probably would find out around May, So if everything goes smoothly, then the program could start to be offered by the time you do all the curriculum and all that stuff, which is the hard work, fall 2023.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
So 40
That's so
units.
exciting.
Yeah, the requirement is 40 units. The CS requirement is a minimum of 40 units in the degree and a minimum of 9 units of GE. So I got to go hunting in the psychology, sociology departments. I'm going to need a couple of GE instructors to teach, to create and teach these general education classes.
Oh, okay. So let me ask this. If you were to talk to a student who was interested in RT, what kind of advice would you give them?
The advice I give them, which we kind of already talked about, because like I said, I do this, is number one, we ask them what do they think they want to do. I try to make sure they understand that most people can do this job. Most people, because a lot of people think they can't handle being in the hospital. We show them the brevity of it, 3 years, and you'll be working, and you'll be earning, and you'll be helping people, and you won't have to do any bedpans. And you can go work anywhere in the state. I mean, anywhere in the country. That's what got me to Ventura. If I hadn't been a respiratory therapist, I never would have been to Ventura. I wouldn't have my wife and my kids and my grandkids. I wouldn't have got to live at the beach. Pretty good, 25 years old, living at the beach. Doesn't get much better than that, does it? And then my kids actually went to that elementary school. We moved into that neighborhood called the Keys in Ventura. And they actually went to school right on the beach. And they complained about it. To them, it was like no big deal to walk down to the beach. I'm going, are you kidding me? So anyway.
Greg, if a student wants to find out more information about the program, what's the best way to do so? Should they connect with you? Should
Go
they
to the Valley College website. The RT website's there, and then have them email me. So we have just a fantastic support group here. So if I get an email from a student, which I do, the best thing is to send me an email, and then I can give them the information, and then I hook them up directly with Rafa, our counselor. And she's great. I just CC the email to them, and then she contacts them and makes them an appointment.
Okay. So I guess if they Google LAVC and respiratory therapy, they'll just get to the website directly.
They will. They can go on YouTube and find our program. Our students every year when we have our commencement ceremony created, and I sent you the link to it.
Yeah, we'll put it in the description of this episode. A link to the cohort. It looks wonderful. It looks like a really fun program.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Respiratory therapy should be fun. And I'm on the advisory board for Birmingham High School. So what I do when every year, the allied health instructor, Ellen, has me talk to the students. So the first thing I do is play that. Okay. I try to cut it before they show some of the students drinking, because maybe I should having margaritas at the end of a long day or at their graduation. So yeah, that's what I like to show, that is that it actually is a very fun program.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. I think there's just a lot of information here. I've been wanting to share with my students about respiratory therapy, but I just didn't know enough detail, and this really helps me.
Yeah, thank you for your time this afternoon, Greg. We know you're really busy, and we really appreciate you taking time to share.
That's okay. I always like talking about myself, so that's fine. It's much better. I mean, working on this application packet, this is all stuff I'm not good at. So that's the stuff that stresses me. When I'm in the lab, you're gonna pull my dead body out of that lab. I'm gonna retire probably full time in a couple of years, but I'll still keep teaching. So teaching is the fun part, right? It's the program director stuff that accreditation and all that stuff that I could do without. But
I'm with you. That's why I gave that up, and I gave all my work to Scott.
Thanks, John.
Fortunately, Scott. I have someone to split it with, and Cheryl Pearson. She's the clinical director. So, but yeah, I'm anxious to unload the director. I still want to teach, so I get to teach in the lab, and then I get to go to the hospital and grill the students there. So we sit down in a group and we go through what they're doing with their patients, and this group, since we weren't on campus the whole time because of COVID, so this has been like the next in the winter will be our first normal semester where we're on campus in lab full time, and we got back in the hospitals in the summer. So this group took a little bit longer to get to know. So
well, thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure.